The maid's daughter sat quietly on the cold marble floor, her tiny fingers trembling as she held the broken pieces of her favorite toy. The silence around her felt too big, too heavy for someone so small. Tears rolled slowly down her cheeks, dropping onto the spotless floor that reflected her sadness like a mirror. She tried to stay quiet, just like her mother had told her, but the ache in her chest was stronger than her promise. Outside the room, everything remained perfect. Too perfect. The kind of perfection that didn't allow mistakes, didn't allow noise, didn't allow life to happen. This wasn't a place for children. It wasn't even a place for emotions. High above the city, inside one of the most luxurious penthouses anyone could imagine, lived a man who had built his entire life on control. Control over his time, his business, his surroundings, and most importantly, his emotions. People admired him, feared him, talked about him, but no one truly knew him. Adrian Cole. A name that carried weight in every boardroom. A man whose decisions could build fortunes or destroy them overnight. He was known for his sharp mind, his discipline, and the cold distance he maintained from everyone around him. Employees whispered about him in low voices. Not because he was cruel, but because he was unreadable. And sometimes that was worse. He didn't believe in unnecessary conversations. He didn't ask about personal lives. He didn't smile without reason. To him, emotions were distractions and distractions were weaknesses. And yet, at that exact moment, something unusual was about to break through the carefully constructed walls of his world. The girl sniffled again, trying to hold herself together. The broken toy lay in her lap, its tiny arm snapped off. The soft music it once played now completely silent. It wasn't just a toy. It was the only thing she had brought with her that day. The only thing that made her feel safe, in a place that didn't feel like it belonged to her. Her name was Alina. She was only 6 years old, but she had already learned how to stay quiet, how to take up as little space as possible, how to not disturb people who were more powerful than her. Her mother had taught her that, not because she wanted to, but because life had forced her to. That morning hadn't gone as planned. It never did when life was already fragile. Her mother, Sophia, had no choice but to bring her along. The usual neighbor who watched Alina had cancelled at the last minute, and missing work wasn't an option. Not in this job. Not in this house. So Sophia had done what she had never done before. She had brought her daughter into a world that wasn't meant for her. "Stay in the room," she had said softly, kneeling in front of her. "Don't make any noise. I'll come back soon." Alina had nodded. She always nodded. She didn't want to cause problems. She didn't want to make her mother worried. But now, sitting alone with her broken toy, she felt something she couldn't control. The quiet pain turned into soft cries, and the soft cries slowly grew louder. And that was when it happened. The door to the penthouse opened. Adrian stepped inside earlier than expected. His day had been cut short. A meeting cancelled. A decision postponed. It annoyed him slightly, but he didn't show it. He never showed anything. He placed his phone on the counter, loosened his tie slightly, and walked further into the silence of his home. Everything was exactly how he liked it. Clean. Organized, predictable. Until it wasn't. A faint sound reached his ears. He stopped. At first, he thought it was nothing. Maybe a noise from outside, maybe something mechanical, but then he heard it again. A soft cry. His expression didn't change, but something in his posture did. A slight pause. A break in his routine. That sound didn't belong here. He followed it slowly, each step measured, controlled. The closer he got, the clearer it became. It was a child. He frowned slightly. There were no children in his world. He reached the door where the sound was coming from and hesitated for just a second. Not because he was unsure, but because this situation didn't fit into anything he understood. Then he opened the door. Inside he saw her. A small girl sitting on the floor, her shoulders shaking as she cried over something in her hands. For a moment, he simply stood there, observing, analyzing, trying to understand why this scene felt so unfamiliar. She hadn't noticed him yet. She was too focused on the broken toy, whispering softly as if hoping it would somehow fix itself. "Please, don't be broken," she murmured. Something about that made him step forward. He didn't call for staff. He didn't ask questions. He didn't react the way anyone would expect him to. Instead, he walked into the room, slowly, quietly. And then, to his own surprise, he did something no one had ever seen him do. He sat down, right there on the floor, beside her. Alina looked up suddenly, startled. Her tear-filled eyes met his, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. She didn't know who he was, but she could tell he was important, and he didn't know what to say. But he knew he couldn't just walk away. "What happened?" he asked, his voice calm, low. She hesitated, then held up the broken toy with shaking hands. "It broke," she said softly. He looked at it carefully. It was simple, cheap, fragile, but the way she held it told him everything he needed to know. "It was important to you," he said. She nodded. And then, something shifted. Not in the room, not in the air, but in him. For the first time in years, Adrian felt something he couldn't immediately explain. It wasn't discomfort. It wasn't a recognition. Not of the situation, but of the feeling. He remembered something a long time ago. Something small. Something broken. Something that had mattered. And before he could stop himself, he said something unexpected. "Then it's okay to cry." Alina blinked, surprised. No one had ever told her that before. She stared at him, unsure, but her crying slowly softened. And in that quiet moment, something invisible began to change. Not loudly, not dramatically, but deeply. Neither of them understood it yet, but this was the beginning. Adrian remained seated on the floor. Something that would have seemed impossible to anyone who knew him. The silence between him and the little girl was no longer cold or distant. It had changed into something softer, something unfamiliar, yet not uncomfortable. He watched her carefully, not like a businessman studying numbers, but like someone trying to understand a language he had forgotten. Alina wiped her cheeks with the back of her small hand, still holding the broken toy close to her chest, as if letting it go would make things worse. She glanced at him again, curiosity slowly replacing fear. "You're not angry?" she asked quietly. The question caught him off guard. Not because it was difficult, but because of what it implied. In her world, adults got angry. Mistakes led to punishment. Accidents were not forgiven easily. Adrian paused for a brief moment before answering. "No," he said simply. She blinked, as if trying to understand how that was possible. Then she looked back at the toy. "I didn't mean to break it," she added, her voice trembling slightly. "I know," he replied. And he did know. Not because he had proof, but because it was obvious. There was no carelessness in her, no recklessness. Just a child holding on to something precious in a place that didn't belong to her. He reached out his hand slowly. "May I see it?" he asked. She hesitated again, but this time only for a second. Then she carefully placed the toy in his hand. Adrian examined it. The damage was small, but enough to stop it from working. The mechanism inside had likely snapped. To most people, it would be worthless. But to her, it was everything. "Can it be fixed?" she asked, hope barely holding on in her voice. He looked at the toy, then at her. "Yes," he said. He wasn't entirely sure yet, but he said it anyway. And somehow, that one word made her sit up a little straighter. "Really?" she whispered. "Yes." There was a quiet confidence in his voice. The kind of confidence that didn't come from guessing, but from deciding. For the first time since he entered the room, something close to a smile appeared on her face. Small, fragile. "But what's your name?" he asked. "Alina," she replied. He nodded slightly. "I'm Adrian." She tilted her head a little, repeating it softly as if memorizing it. Adrian. He wasn't used to hearing his name like that. Not without titles. Not without distance. Just his name. Before he could say anything else, hurried footsteps echoed in the hallway. The door opened quickly. Sophia stood there, frozen. Her eyes widened as she saw the scene in front of her. Her daughter on the floor. Her employer sitting beside her. Her face lost all color. "I'm so sorry, sir." She rushed out, her voice shaking. "I didn't have anyone to watch her. I promise it won't happen again. I just—" "Stop," Adrian said calmly. She immediately fell silent. The room became still again. "She didn't do anything wrong," he added. Sophia blinked, confused. "I told her to stay quiet," she said quickly, almost desperately. "If she made noise, I take full responsibility." She broke her toy. Adrian interrupted, holding it up slightly. That's why she was crying. Sophia looked at Alina, then back at him. I'm sorry, she whispered again. Adrian stood up slowly, brushing invisible dust from his suit. His posture returned to its usual composed form, but something in his expression had softened. It can be repaired, he said. Sophia didn't respond right away. She didn't know how to. Thank you, sir, she said finally, her voice still unsure. He nodded once. Then he turned and walked out of the room. No anger, no warning, no punishment, just calm. Sophia stood there for several seconds, unable to move. Alina looked up at her. He said it's okay to cry, she said softly. Sophia swallowed hard, her eyes filling with emotion she quickly tried to hide. She walked over and knelt beside her daughter, pulling her into a tight hug. Are you okay? She asked gently. Alina nodded. He's not scary, she added. Sophia didn't answer that, because she didn't know if it was true. 3 days passed. Everything seemed normal, too normal. Adrian continued his routine as if nothing had happened. Meetings, calls, reports, precision, silence, but there was something different, something subtle, something only noticeable if you were paying close attention. Sophia was paying attention. She expected consequences, a message, a warning, something. But nothing came. Still, she couldn't relax. Every time she heard his footsteps, her heart raced. Every time she passed his office, she felt tension in her chest. But Adrian said nothing, until Friday. That morning a package arrived. It wasn't like the usual deliveries. It was smaller, carefully wrapped, no label. Sophia stared at it for a moment before noticing the tag. For Alina, her breath caught. She looked around instinctively as if expecting someone to explain. No one did. With careful hands she opened it. Inside was a toy, a music box. Almost identical to the one that had broken. But this one was perfect, brand new, flawless. There was also a small note. Some things deserve a second chance. No signature. But she knew. That evening, when Sophia gave it to Alina, the little girl's reaction was immediate. Her eyes lit up in pure joy. You fixed it, she said excitedly. Sophia shook her head. No, she said softly. He did. Alina held the toy carefully, as if afraid it might disappear. She turned the key. The soft melody filled the room. Her face lit up in a way that made everything else disappear. Can I say thank you? She asked. Sophia smiled faintly. I think he already knows, she replied. The following Monday, Adrian entered the kitchen while Sophia was working. She stiffened slightly. You gave it to her? He asked. Yes, sir, she replied. He nodded. She liked it. Sophia allowed herself a small smile. She loved it. There was a brief pause. Then Adrian said something unexpected. Good. And for a moment, just a brief moment, Sophia thought she saw something in his eyes that had never been there before. Not power. Not control. Something quieter. Something human. The days that followed didn't change loudly. There were no grand announcements, no sudden shifts that anyone could point to and say, this is where everything became different. Instead, the change settled in slowly, like warmth seeping into a room that had always been cold. Adrian still woke before sunrise. His routine remained precise, calculated, untouched on the surface. Coffee, reports, meetings. Decisions that moved millions without hesitation. To the outside world, he was exactly the same man he had always been. But inside the penthouse, something subtle had begun to shift. Sophia noticed it first. Not in anything he said, but in what he didn't ignore anymore. Before, Adrian walked through his home as if it were an extension of his office. Silent, efficient, untouched by anything personal. Now, there were pauses. Small ones. Barely noticeable. A second longer in the hallway. A brief glance toward the guest room. And then came the day it became undeniable. Sophia stood near the kitchen counter, drying a glass carefully when she heard the door open behind her. She turned slightly, already aware of who it was. Sir, she greeted quietly. Adrian stepped inside, removing his jacket and placing it neatly over the chair. His movements were the same as always, controlled, deliberate. But then he said something unexpected. If you need to bring her again, you can. Sophia blinked. I, sir, she asked, unsure if she had heard correctly. Your daughter. He clarified without looking at her. If you have no one to watch her. There was no emotion in his voice. No softness. Just a simple statement, but to Sophia it felt like something much bigger. "Thank you, sir," she said carefully. He nodded once, as if the conversation was already finished. But it wasn't finished, not really. Because later that week Alina returned. This time not hidden away, not told to stay completely silent. She walked in holding her music box, the new one, the perfect one, her small fingers wrapped around it protectively. She looked around with wide, curious eyes, but she stayed close to her mother. Adrian noticed her immediately. He was seated in the living area, his laptop open, but his attention shifted the moment she entered. Not fully, not obviously, but enough. Alina hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Hello," she said softly. It wasn't loud. It wasn't confident. But it wasn't afraid either. Adrian looked at her. "Hello, Alina," he replied. Sophia paused in the middle of what she was doing. He remembered her name. That alone felt impossible. Alina smiled slightly and held up her music box. "She's not broken anymore," she said. Adrian nodded. "I can see that." There was a short silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that simply existed, without pressure. Alina moved toward the window, sitting on the floor where the sunlight touched the marble. She carefully wound the key of the music box, and the soft melody filled the room again. Adrian tried to return to his work. He really did. But the sound stayed with him. It wasn't distracting in the way noise usually was. It didn't interrupt his thoughts or break his focus. It did something else. It made the space feel different, less empty. He glanced up briefly. Alina sat quietly, watching the tiny ballerina spin. Completely absorbed, completely content. It was such a simple moment, but it held a kind of peace that didn't exist anywhere else in his life. "Why do you like it so much?" he asked suddenly. The question surprised even him. Alina looked up. "Because it makes me feel happy," she said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. He studied her for a moment. "That's enough reason," he replied. She nodded, satisfied with the answer, and went back to watching the toy. Sophia watched from a distance, her heart slowly easing in a way she didn't fully trust yet. Days turned into weeks, and something continued to grow. Not quickly, not dramatically, but steadily. Adrian began leaving small things around. At first it was almost unnoticeable. A glass of juice placed on the counter, a small pack of cookies left near the table. He never mentioned them. He never said they were for Alina, but they always appeared on the days she came. Alina noticed. Of course she did. Children always notice the things adults pretend not to show. One afternoon, she looked at the cookies, then at Adrian. "Are these for me?" she asked. He didn't look up from his laptop. "They're there," he said simply. She smiled. That was enough. Another day. She sat quietly drawing on a piece of paper Sophia had given her. Her small hand moved carefully, focused, serious in the way only children can be. Adrian glanced at it once. "What are you drawing?" he asked. Alina held it up. "It's you," she said. He paused. The drawing was simple. A tall figure, straight lines, a small circle for a head. Next to it was a smaller figure holding something that looked like the music box. He looked at it longer than he expected. "That's accurate," he said finally. Alina giggled. "No, it's not," she replied. "You don't look like that." He almost smiled. Almost. Something unfamiliar pressed lightly against the edges of his expression. Something he didn't fully allow, but didn't push away either. Sophia noticed. She noticed everything. And for the first time since she had started working there, she didn't feel like she was walking on fragile ground. It wasn't safe yet. But it wasn't dangerous either. It was changing. Then came the moment that shifted everything further. It was a Saturday. Sophia had been asked to come in for extra hours. A formal dinner was scheduled that evening, and everything needed to be perfect. She brought Alina again, planning to keep her in the guest room like before. But when Adrian saw them, he didn't retreat. He didn't ignore them. Instead, he said something completely unexpected. Sophia froze. Alina blinked. "For me?" she asked. Adrian paused. "It's leftover," he said. Then, after a brief moment, he added, "Yes." Alina looked at her mother for permission. Sophia nodded slowly. Alina walked to the kitchen carefully, as if she were entering a place she wasn't fully allowed to be. On the counter sat a small box. Inside were neatly arranged cupcakes. One of them had a tiny ballerina on top. Alina's eyes widened. She picked it up gently, holding it like something precious. "Thank you," she said quietly. Adrian didn't respond right away, but he didn't leave either. He stayed. That was new. Alina sat on the stool, her legs swinging slightly as she took small bites of the cupcake. She hummed softly between bites, the same melody from her music box. Sophia watched the scene, something deep in her chest shifting. This wasn't part of any routine. This wasn't part of any system. This was something else. Something human. And Adrian, standing there in the same space he had once kept completely untouched by anything personal, didn't interrupt it. He didn't stop it, he allowed it. Which, for a man like him, meant more than words ever could. Time didn't rush forward after that moment. It moved in its usual quiet way, one day folding into the next, but something inside the penthouse had undeniably changed. Not in a way that outsiders would notice, not in a way that would ever make headlines, but in a way that mattered far more to the people within it. Adrian still maintained control over his world, but control no longer meant isolation. There were interruptions now, small ones, and he didn't eliminate them. He let them exist. And most of those interruptions came in the form of a 6-year-old girl who no longer saw him as someone distant or untouchable. Alina had grown comfortable. Not careless, not loud, but comfortable enough to be herself. She no longer waited to be spoken to. She no longer watched every step in fear of doing something wrong. She simply existed in the space. And Adrian, for reasons he didn't fully understand, allowed it. One afternoon, sunlight poured through the massive glass windows, stretching across the floor like a golden blanket. Alina sat in her usual spot, her music box beside her, though today she wasn't playing it. Instead, she was looking out at the city below, her chin resting on her knees. Adrian was nearby, reviewing documents, but he noticed her stillness. "You're quiet today," he said without looking up. She turned slightly. "I'm thinking," she replied. "About what?" She pointed toward the city. "Do all those people have homes like this?" she asked. Adrian followed her gaze. "No," he said. "Why?" she asked simply. There was no judgment in her voice, just curiosity, because not everyone builds the same life, he answered. She thought about that. "Did you build this?" she asked. "Yes." "By yourself?" "Yes." She nodded slowly, absorbing the idea. Was it hard? Adrian leaned back slightly in his chair. "Yes." "How hard?" He considered the question. Hard enough that most people wouldn't want to do it. She seemed satisfied with that answer, but then she asked something else. Was it lonely? That question lingered. Longer than the others. Adrian didn't respond immediately. He wasn't used to answering questions like that. Questions that didn't have clear, structured answers. Questions that required something more than logic. "Yes," he said finally. Alina looked at him, her expression soft. "Then why did you do it?" He met her eyes. "Because I thought it was worth it." She tilted her head. "And was it?" Another pause. This one even longer. "I don't know," he admitted. It was the most honest thing he had said in a long time. Alina didn't respond right away. She simply nodded, as if she understood something that didn't need to be explained. Then she smiled a little. "You're not lonely now," she said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. And somehow that made it harder to answer. Adrian looked away, back at the city, but the view felt different now, less distant, more real. Days passed, and their conversations grew slightly longer. Still simple, still quiet, but meaningful in ways Adrian hadn't experienced in years. One day Alina walked over to him while he was working. "What are you doing?" she asked, peering at his laptop. "Working," he replied. "What kind of work?" "Business." She frowned slightly. "That sounds boring." He looked at her. "Sometimes it is." She climbed onto the chair across from him, her feet barely reaching the edge. "Can I see?" He hesitated for a brief moment, then turned the screen slightly toward her. Rows of numbers. Charts data. She stared at it for a few seconds. "I don't understand," she said. "That's normal," he replied. She pointed at something randomly. What's that? A report. What does it do? It helps me make decisions. Like what? Like what to build next, what to fix, what to change. She thought about that. So you fix things. He paused. Yes, he said slowly. I suppose I do. She smiled, like my toy. He didn't respond, but something in his expression shifted again. Later that same week, Alina brought something new. A small notebook. She placed it on the table in front of Adrian. What's this? He asked. It's for you, she said. He looked at it, confused. For what? So you don't forget things, she said. I don't forget things, he replied. She shook her head. You forgot to smile before. He went still. That wasn't something anyone had ever said to him. You smile now, she added. He looked at her, searching for something in her expression. There was no judgment, no expectation, just observation. I see, he said quietly. Write it down, she insisted, pushing the notebook closer to him. He didn't argue. He opened it. The first page was blank. For a moment, he didn't know what to write. Then, slowly, he picked up a pen and wrote one word. Remember. Alina nodded approvingly. Good, she said. Sophia watched all of this from a distance. She didn't interrupt. She didn't question. But she felt it. The shift. The change. The way her daughter had somehow reached a part of Adrian that no one else could. It wasn't forced. It wasn't planned. It just happened. Then came the day that would change everything again. It was Alina's birthday. Sophia had planned something small. A simple day at home. A cake from a nearby shop. Nothing extravagant. She hadn't told Adrian. She didn't think it mattered. But that morning something unexpected happened. A car arrived outside her building. A driver stepped out and handed her an envelope. Inside was a note. If she is free today, I would like to see her. No signature. But she knew. Sophia hesitated. Then she looked at Alina. Do you want to go somewhere? She asked. Alina nodded immediately. They arrived at a place Sophia had never seen before. Not the penthouse. Something smaller. Private. When the door opened, Alina gasped. The room was filled with soft decorations, balloons, a table, a cake. And standing there, slightly uncomfortable, was Adrian. No suit jacket, no tie, just a simple shirt. Alina ran to him without hesitation and hugged him. For a brief moment, Adrian froze. Then, slowly, he placed his hand on her back. Not perfectly, not naturally, but sincerely. Happy birthday, Alina, he said. Her smile was brighter than anything in the room, and for the first time in years, Adrian Cole didn't feel like he was standing alone in his own world. The room was filled with a kind of warmth that didn't belong to Adrian's usual world. It wasn't structured or controlled. It didn't follow a schedule or a system. It simply existed in the laughter of a child, in the soft flicker of candles, and in the quiet presence of three people who, in different ways, had all found something they didn't know they were missing. Alina stood in front of the cake, her eyes wide with wonder. The ballerina on top spun gently as if it had been made just for her. She looked back at Adrian, almost as if she needed to confirm that this was real. For me? She asked again, her voice filled with disbelief. Adrian nodded. For you. She didn't wait another second. She clapped her hands softly, her excitement finally spilling over, and Sophia felt her chest tighten at the sight. It had been a long time since she had seen her daughter this happy without holding anything back. Make a wish, Sophia said gently. Alina closed her eyes, her small hands clasped together. She stayed like that for a moment longer than expected, as if she was trying to make sure her wish was strong enough to come true. Then she opened her eyes and blew out the candles. The room fell into a soft silence for a second, followed by the faint sound of her laughter. Adrian watched it all quietly. He wasn't used to moments like this. They weren't part of his world, not the one he had built. There were no celebrations in his life, no small, meaningful pauses like this. Everything had always been about moving forward, about achieving the next goal, reaching the next level. But this was different. This wasn't about progress. This was about presence. Alina turned to him suddenly. What did you wish for? She asked. Adrian raised an eyebrow slightly. It's your wish, he said. I know, she replied, smiling. But what would you wish for? He didn't answer immediately. He wasn't sure. Not because he didn't understand the question, but because he had never really thought about it in that way. "I don't usually make wishes," he said. She tilted her head. "Why not?" "Because I prefer things I can control." She thought about that for a moment, then shook her head. "That's not as fun," she said. He almost smiled again. Almost. They sat together at the table as Sophia cut the cake. It wasn't anything extravagant, but to Alina, it felt like the most special thing in the world. She took her first bite and closed her eyes. "It's perfect," she said. Adrian watched her reaction closely, something in it settling quietly inside him. Sophia glanced at him briefly. "Thank you," she said softly. He nodded, but didn't respond. Words weren't necessary. Not here. Not in this moment. After the cake, Alina opened her gift. It was a book. Simple on the outside, but carefully chosen. She ran her fingers over the cover. "What is it?" she asked. "It's about building things," Adrian said. "Like toys. Like ideas," he replied. She opened it slowly, flipping through the pages. "There are so many words," she said. "You'll learn them," he answered. She looked up at him, her expression serious. "Will you help me?" That question lingered in the air. It wasn't complicated, but it carried weight. "Yes," he said, and he meant it. That day didn't end with anything dramatic. There were no big speeches, no emotional confessions, just quiet moments. Small interactions, but those were the ones that mattered most. As the weeks passed, the bond between them grew stronger. Not loudly, not suddenly, but in a steady, natural way. Alina began asking more questions. Not just about simple things, but about him. "Why do you work so much? Why don't you have pictures? Why is your house so quiet?" At first, Adrian answered simply. Short responses. Controlled. But over time, his answers changed. They became longer. More thoughtful. Less guarded. One evening, as the sun set behind the city, casting soft orange light across the room, Alina sat beside him again. "Do you like being alone?" she asked. He looked at her. "I'm used to it," he said. "That's not the same," she replied. He paused. "No," he admitted. "It's not," she nodded, satisfied with his honesty. "You don't have to be alone," she said. It was such a simple statement, but it carried a truth he had spent years avoiding, and for the first time, he didn't push it away. He let it stay. Sophia noticed everything. The way Adrian listened now, the way he paused before leaving a room, as if considering whether to stay, the way the penthouse itself felt different, less empty. More alive. She never expected this. Not in a place like this, not with a man like him. But something had changed. Not just in him, but in all of them. Then came the moment that would test everything. It was a quiet afternoon. Alina was sitting near the window again, her music box playing softly, when her expression changed. The melody stopped. Her face fell. "No," she whispered. She turned the key again, nothing. Her hands began to tremble. Not again. She looked at the toy, panic rising in her chest. "It's broken again," she said, her voice barely holding together. Sophia rushed over immediately. "Let me see," she said gently. But Alina pulled it closer. "No," she said, tears already forming. Adrian stood up, slowly. He walked over and knelt beside her again. "Just like the first time." "What happened?" he asked calmly. "I didn't do anything," she said, her voice shaking. "I promise." "I know," he replied. He took the music box carefully. Something small. Something fixable. But this time, it wasn't just about the toy. It was about her fear. Her memory, her belief that good things didn't last. He looked at her. "It's going to be okay," he said. She shook her head. "It broke before too," she whispered. He understood. This wasn't about the toy. This was about something deeper. Something she had already learned at such a young age. That things you love can be taken away. That happiness can be temporary. Adrian placed the toy gently on the table. Then he looked at her again. "Not everything that breaks is lost," he said. She looked at him, her eyes searching. "I'll fix it," he added. Her breathing slowed slightly. "Promise?" she asked. He didn't hesitate. "Promise." And in that moment, it wasn't just a promise about a toy. It was something more. Something neither of them fully understood yet. But something that would change everything moving forward. Adrian didn't hand the music box back right away. Instead, he stood there for a moment, holding it with a level of care that didn't match how he handled most things in his life. Usually, objects were just tools to him. Replaceable, functional, without emotional weight. But this was different. He looked at Alina. She was watching him closely, her eyes still wet, her small hands clenched together as if she was holding on to hope itself. "I'll take it with me," he said. Her expression shifted slightly. "You're not going to throw it away?" she asked quietly. "No," he replied. That one word settled her more than anything else could have. Sophia stood nearby, her heart caught somewhere between gratitude and disbelief. Even now, she found it hard to fully accept how much had changed. How much he had changed. Adrian turned slightly toward her. "I'll have it repaired today," he said. Sophia nodded. "Thank you, sir." He didn't respond to the gratitude. He simply walked away, the music box still in his hand. But this time, when he entered his study, something was different. He didn't immediately sit down to work. He placed the music box on his desk and looked at it. Really looked at it. The crack was small. The mechanism inside had likely jammed again. It wasn't a complicated fix, not for someone with the right tools and patience. He could have sent it out. He could have asked someone else to handle it. That would have been the easier, more efficient option. But he didn't. Instead, he opened a drawer. Inside were things he hadn't touched in years. Old tools. Small instruments. Things from a version of himself that no longer existed. Or at least, that's what he had believed. He picked one up, turned it in his hand, then sat down. Carefully, he began to open the music box. His movements were slower than usual, less precise, not because he lacked skill, but because this wasn't about speed or efficiency. This was about care. Time passed differently in that room. Minutes stretched longer. The world outside his study continued as always, calls, messages, responsibilities, but he ignored all of it. For once, nothing else mattered. Piece by piece he worked, adjusting, fixing, remembering, and with every small movement, something inside him shifted, not dramatically, not suddenly, but undeniably. He wasn't just fixing a toy. He was reconnecting with something he had buried a long time ago. Hours later, he leaned back slightly. The music box sat in front of him. He turned the key gently. The melody played. Perfect. For a moment, he simply listened. Then he closed his eyes briefly. Not out of exhaustion, but because the sound meant something now, more than it had before. When he stepped out of the study, Sophia looked up immediately. Alina was sitting quietly, her eyes fixed on the door. Adrian walked toward them. He didn't say anything. He simply knelt down and placed the music box in front of her. Alina stared at it, then at him. Then back at the toy. Slowly, she reached for it. She turned the key. The melody filled the room again. Her face lit up instantly. "It works!" she said, her voice filled with relief and joy. Adrian nodded. "Yes." She hugged the music box tightly, then looked at him again. "Thank you," she said. He didn't respond with words, but this time he didn't need to, because something in his expression had already said enough. Days passed. Then weeks. And what had started as something small continued to grow into something neither of them could ignore anymore. Adrian found himself making time, not scheduling it, not planning it, but allowing it. He would finish work earlier, sit in the living room instead of isolating himself in his study, and Alina would always find her way there, sometimes with her music box, sometimes with her notebook, sometimes just with questions. Always with curiosity. One afternoon she sat beside him again, flipping through the book he had given her. "There are a lot of things I don't understand," she said. "That's normal," he replied. She pointed a page. "What does this mean?" He leaned closer. "It's about building something step by step," he explained. "Like what?" "Anything," he said. "A company. A machine. Even a life." She looked at him. "Did you build your life step by step?" "Yes." "Did you do it right?" The question was simple, but the answer wasn't. "I thought I did," he said slowly. "And now?" she asked. He paused, then looked at her. "I'm still figuring that out." She smiled slightly. "You can fix it," she said. He looked at her. "Like my toy." Something in that comparison stayed with him. More than it should have. More than he expected. That evening, after Sophia and Alina had left, Adrian stood alone in the penthouse. But it didn't feel the same. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It held something. Something that lingered. Something that didn't disappear when they walked out the door. He walked into his study. Looked at the notebook Alina had given him. He opened it. The word he had written before was still there. Remember. He stared at it for a moment. Then added something underneath. Why it matters. He closed the notebook slowly. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like his life was just a series of decisions and outcomes. It felt like something else, something unfinished, something still growing. The next morning, he did something unexpected. He cancelled a meeting, not because it wasn't important, but because something else was. That afternoon, when Alina arrived again, she noticed immediately. "You're not working?" she asked. "I am," he replied. She looked around, but not like before. He nodded. "Yes," she smiled. Good. He didn't ask why she thought that. He already knew. Because somewhere along the way, without realizing it, he had started to understand something he had ignored for years. That success without connection felt incomplete. That control without meaning felt empty. And that sometimes, the smallest moments carried the greatest weight. Alina looked at him again. "Are you happy?" she asked. The question was simple. But this time the answer came easier. "Yes," he said. And for the first time it was true. The days no longer felt like something Adrian had to get through. They felt like something he was part of. That difference was quiet, but it changed everything. Before, every hour had been measured by output, by results, by what could be gained or lost. Now, there were moments that didn't fit into that system. Moments that had no measurable value, yet somehow mattered more than anything he had built. Alina continued to visit regularly, no longer as a hidden presence, but as someone who belonged in the space. She moved through the penthouse with a kind of gentle confidence, still respectful, still careful, but no longer afraid. Sophia noticed it too. Her daughter laughed more, asked more questions, held her music box not like something fragile that could disappear, but like something she trusted would remain. And Adrian, he had changed in ways that no one outside those walls could see. He still ran his company with precision, still made decisions that affected thousands of people, still held the same reputation in the world beyond his home. But inside, something had softened. Something had opened. One evening, as the sky turned deep shades of orange and gold, Alina sat beside him again, her notebook open in her lap. "I wrote something," she said. He looked at her. "Can I hear it?" he asked. She nodded, then began to read slowly, carefully sounding out each word. "It says, things can break, but that doesn't mean they are gone. Sometimes someone fixes them, and sometimes they become better." She looked up at him. "Is that right?" she asked. Adrian didn't answer immediately. He was looking at her, but also beyond her at something much further back. Memories. Choices. A version of himself he had left behind. "Yes," he said finally. "That's right," she smiled. "I wrote it because of you," she added. That stayed with him. Not because it was praise, but because it meant something deeper. He had become part of her understanding of the world, and that carried a responsibility he had never considered before. Later that night, after they had left, Adrian stood by the window, looking out at the city he had once believed was everything. The lights stretched endlessly, buildings he had influenced, decisions he had made, all of it still there, still important, but no longer the only thing. He thought about the past, about the years he had spent building, pushing, sacrificing, about the things he had gained, and the things he had lost without even realizing it. Then he thought about something much simpler. A broken toy, a small voice asking questions, a child who didn't see him as a title or a position or a reputation, just as a person. And somehow that had changed more than anything else ever had. The next morning he did something that would have been unthinkable before. He rearranged his schedule, not for a meeting, not for a deal, but for something else. That afternoon, when Sophia arrived with Alina, they found something new. A small table set near the window, 2 chairs, a stack of books, and a quiet invitation. Alina looked at it, then at Adrian. "What is this?" she asked. A place to learn, he said. Her eyes lit up. For me. For us, he replied. That answer meant more than she could fully understand, but she felt it. She sat down immediately, opening one of the books. What are we learning? She asked. He sat across from her. Anything you want, he said, and that was how it began. Not as something formal, not as something planned, but as something real. They read together, talked, shared ideas, simple things, important things. And through it all, Adrian realized something he had never fully understood before. That teaching wasn't just about giving knowledge. It was about connection, about patience, about being present. Sophia watched from a distance, her heart full in a way she hadn't expected. She had come into this place hoping only to keep her job, to survive, to provide for her daughter. But now she was witnessing something else entirely. Something rare, something unexpected, something good. Months passed, seasons began to shift, and the changes that had started quietly continued to grow stronger. Adrian no longer avoided connection. He embraced it, not everywhere, not with everyone, but where it mattered. And it mattered here, with them. One afternoon, as they sat together again, Alina looked at him thoughtfully. Do you still feel lonely? She asked. He thought about it, then shook his head. She smiled. Good. There was a pause, then she added something else. You fixed it. He looked at her. What? Your life? She said simply. He didn't respond right away, because the truth was, he hadn't fixed it alone. But he didn't say that. Instead, he said something else. We fixed it. She seemed satisfied with that, and in that moment, there was no need for anything more. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full. Full of everything that had changed, everything that had been built, not with money, not with power, but with something far more important. Understanding, trust, connection. And as the soft melody of the music box played once again in the background, it was clear that what had started as a small, broken moment had turned into something lasting. Something real. Something that would not be easily broken again.